I had studied it this week and read it, and it took me quite a while to sort of get my noggin around it. I spent a long time on Friday writing the message, and I looked at the message yesterday morning, and I'm like, what is this? I found I didn't like what I'd written the day before, so I kind of scratched out some notes for today, and now I'm here to practice on you. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at Jeremiah 7 together. And one question, you don't need to tell me, but I imagine probably from some of my young friends here that when you drive in the car, what's the volume that you keep it at? Is it low? It's high, right? Maybe the same with you. My question today is, how's your hearing? And when I'm in the car listening to music, I turn it up as high as it'll go. I don't know. I just like to feel music going through my body. That's just me. And maybe some of you are the same. But I know one of the things is that I get older, my hearing gets worse. Some of it's selective, depending on who's talking to me. No, that's a kid. Actually, that is true. That's true of all of us, isn't it? We have selective hearing. Some of it's because we've damaged our hearing. I mean, I worked in a wood shop for 5 years with nail guns and with saws. That's probably long-term not great. Some of you have been there, done that as well. And then others, it's just a function of getting old. As we get older, our hearing either gets duller, and some are probably resisting getting a hearing aid, even though they might need it. And others they've got hearing that's hypersensitive. You can drop a pin down the block, and they're going to hear it. And every noise bothers them. And so when we think about hearing, it's an easy thing to connect with. But here in the scripture that we're going to be looking at, it's not about just hearing like on the one physical level. The whole concept that's behind Jeremiah 7 is hearing the word of the Lord, and not just hearing the word of the Lord, but responding to it, doing what God says. And God sends Jeremiah with a task, a very difficult task. Jeremiah, as we looked last week, the call of Jeremiah, he's a young person, maybe about 20 years old, 19, 20. It's hard exactly to pin it down. His dad was a priest, and he had obviously other plans for his life, but all of a sudden God says, before you were born, I set you apart to be a prophet to the nations. And God calls Jeremiah and says, and I've got a tough job for you. Your job for the rest of your life is to take my message to people, and oh, by the way, they're not going to listen to you. But your job is to take the message. And Jeremiah distinguished himself as someone who's faithful, who for the next 41 years and beyond did what God told him to do, even though he saw very little fruit, actual fruit of his labor. And yet he's a hero to us because of his faithfulness. Well, God gives him, look in chapter 7 with me, and maybe go forward a slide. Actually, one slide before we get to reading it. This text it sort of fell into place yesterday for me. This text is really built around the phrase deceptive words. You see, the people that God sends Jeremiah to, they were listening to the wrong voices. They should have been listening to God, but they weren't listening to God. They were listening to other people who were telling them other things about God, and they fell for the lies of those around them. And so the whole text is built around the phrase deceptive words. And also there's additional words that add to that is the word listen, word or words, and spoke. And there's a direct point of contact. We're going to look at 2 Timothy chapter 4 in a few minutes together, but 2 Timothy 4, 1 to 5 is a New Testament passage that has direct bearing on the whole concept of who are you listening to? Who are your ears open to? And we need to be very careful about blocking out what other people around us are saying about how to live, and having ears that are tuned to hearing how does God want me to live? How does God want me to think? How does God want me to respond? And God gives Jeremiah this really difficult task. Next slide, please, Scott. God says to Jeremiah, it's like a Sabbath, like our Sunday, and everyone was going back to the temple in that day because Josiah was a good king. His father was one of the most wicked people on the planet. Go figure that, eh? Horrible, horrible dad. Every imaginable evil that could be done, his father did. And yet, he has a son who becomes a very righteous king. Age 8 becomes king. And then around age, I think 18 or 19, somebody finds the Bible and reads it to him because the Bible had been missing for 100 years. And when he hears the Bible, he's like, we are in serious trouble. we need to repent. And he led to all these wonderful reforms. But the problem is some of those reforms, while they were real in Josiah's heart, a lot of other people were just playing along. You play along with the king because he's got a sword. And so all these folks were coming back to the temple, and the temple's getting restored and rebuilt and looked after, and they're bringing their offerings, and all this is going on. And God says, Jeremiah says, I've got a message for you to take. You go stand by the gate of the temple, and you preach to them the message that I tell you to preach. And so when we read Jeremiah 7 together now, just remember, Jeremiah is standing at the door, and as people are walking in, he's shouting out this message, and it's a message from God. So let's look at the text together. This is the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house, and there proclaim this message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord. It's the temple of the Lord. It's the temple of the Lord. If you really change your ways and your actions, and you deal with each other justly, if you do not oppress the alien, that means people who are from other countries, the fatherless or the widow, and if you stop shedding innocent blood in this place, and if you don't follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land that I gave to your forefathers forever and ever. But look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods that you've not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, we're safe. We're safe to do all these detestable things. Has this house, which bears my name, become a den of robbers to you? But I've been watching, declares the Lord. Imagine you're Jeremiah. They're coming in. You're saying this to people who think they're coming to worship God. And Jeremiah's at the gate saying, you people, you're not doing something that pleases God at all. Go now to the place in Shiloh. This is God, part of the message. Go to the place in Shiloh where I first made a dwelling for my name, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. While you were doing all these things, declares the Lord, I spoke to you again and again, but you didn't listen. I called you, but you didn't answer. Therefore, what I did to Shiloh, I will do now to the house that bears my name, the temple that you trust in, the place I gave to you and your fathers. I will thrust you from my presence, just as I did to all your brothers, the people of Ephraim. It's a reference to the exile, the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel. That happened in 722 BC. This is now 40 years prior to 586 BC. So don't pray for this people. Very interesting instruction that God gives to Jeremiah. God says, do not pray for this people. Don't offer any plea or petition for them. Don't plead with me, for I'm not going to listen to you. Do you see what they're doing in the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem? The children, they gather wood. The fathers light the fire. The women knead the dough and they make cakes of bread for the queen of heaven. So that was the goddess of Ashtoreth. God says, look, they're coming to my temple on Saturday, bringing me offerings, bringing me sacrifices, and then they're going home and making some special nice cakes for the goddess of Ashtoreth. God says, I see all that. I'm not blind. I know what they're doing. They pour out drink offerings to other gods to provoke me to anger. But am I the one they're provoking, declares the Lord? Are they not rather harming themselves to their own shame? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My anger and my wrath, it will be poured out on this place, on man and beast, on the trees of the field, on the fruit of the ground, and it will burn and it will not be quenched. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Go ahead, add your burnt offerings to your other sacrifices, and eat the meat yourselves. For when I brought your forefathers out of Egypt and I spoke to them, I didn't just give them commands about burnt offerings and sacrifices, but I gave them this command. Obey me and I will be your God, and you will be my people. Walk in all the ways that I command you, that it may go well with you. You see, they had reduced following God to the ceremonial law. They said, if only we'll just satisfy God by giving him the sacrifices that he wants. God says, that's not what I want. I want you to follow me from your heart. I want you to obey me. But they didn't listen or pay attention. Instead, they followed the stubborn inclinations of their hearts. They went backwards and not forward. And from the time your forefathers left Egypt until now, day after day, again and again, I sent you my servants, the prophets. But they didn't listen to me or pay attention. They were stiff-necked, and they did more evil than their forefathers. And here's the kicker, verse 27. God says to Jeremiah, when you tell them all this, they're not going to listen. Isn't that something? When you tell them all this, they're still not going to listen. Therefore say to them, this is the nation that has not obeyed the Lord its God or responded to correction. Truth has perished. It has vanished from their lips. Cut off your hair and throw it away. Take up a lament on the barren heights, for the Lord has rejected and abandoned this generation that's under his wrath. There's a lot in there. We're going to do our best to march our way through the message that God has Jeremiah bring. And like I say, the key to unfolding the text has to do with words. It has to do with listening. It has to do with the challenge to people. You've been listening to the wrong voices. You've been listening to deceptive words. Why don't you listen to your God? Why do